right, welcome to week 4, and today we're going to be looking at the labs 2.4 and 2.6 and discussing a little bit more about Hello World, introducing you to object-oriented programming, the very bare bones version of that introduction, and then getting you ready to start writing some more code in chapter 3. Also talk briefly about the chapter 1-2 test. So we're going to start off in the Hello World file, and remember you can steal these files from the student files depending on how you set up your Eclipse. So student files, chapter 2, and I can grab the code there and copy it into my folder. Beautiful. So this is your basic Hello World program. It is within a Java class called Hello World, which needs to match exactly the name of the file on the computer, helloworld.java. It is case sensitive, and it should start with an uppercase letter. The package refers to which package you are actually working in your Eclipse project. I'm working in the chapter 2 videos package. So then we have our main method, which takes a command line argument as a string array, which we don't do our command line execution, but you can read about it in the book in chapter 2. And then we do a system.out.println. So this is doing a print line of this literal string that's within quotation marks, so the literal characters. It is an output, and it is using the system library. The statements end in a semicolon, so it ends in a semicolon. When we run this code, we are going to see Hello World printed to the screen. If I changed it to say Hello James and I run it, you'll see that it changes. Hello James. Let's say I put another one in there. Okay, and we hit run and we see they come on separate lines. There's also something called a print statement. So if I backspace the ln and I run, you'll see it no longer jumps to a new line after the first print statement. Cool. So just a couple of little things that we can do in our basic class for Hello World. Let's hop over into greetings. So over in greetings, we're going to pull from the arguments from the command line. Now, we're not going to run this from the command line. I'll just talk briefly about it. When it gets executed on the command line, you can pass arguments directly into the program. It stores those arguments in this string array. So this is just pulling first and last name from the argument array and then including them into this. So let's jump instead into greetings 2, where we're going to use the scanner class to get input from the user during execution. So let's see it first. So I enter my name, I enter my last name, and it gives me a compound print statement with my name included in the statement. How does it do that? Well, let's talk first about the import statement. So the Java util libraries are a whole range of utilities that Java can access. The scanner library in particular is one that can scan for inputs from the user. So we're going to do a scanner object. Notice the capital S for the class name or the library name, capital S for my object or my class name. So a scanner object, which I'm going to name kboard, is equal to a new, this is a very special word in Java, we'll talk more about it in chapter 4, a new scanner object that references the system input. So the input from system. Remember when we do an output, we do system.out. This is using system.in. So it's using an input that the system can recognize as the parameter for this scanner object. So it knows what to scan for. So after this line of code has run, we should be able to reference kboard and any methods that come with that scanner. So we do a print statement, enter your first name. Notice there's no ln. Then we ask for their first name, which we store as a string variable. So we are declaring a string variable called first name, and then we are initializing it with the value of kboard.nextLine. Next line returns a string. Okay, so it returns the line after they press enter on the keyboard. Enter your last name, new string called last name that's been declared. Notice camel case, variable names start with lowercase, separate words are uppercase. No underscores. This isn't Python. String last name is kboard.nextLine. So at this point, I have a variable first name, which has the value entered from the first enter. I have a variable last name, which has the value entered from the second enter. And now I'm going to do a compound print statement. So a print statement that involves both literal strings and involves variables. So you'll notice the literal string is in quotations. Then I put a plus sign. Now this plus sign is not addition. When you have a plus sign and either of the values is a string, it does what's called string concatenation, which just means smushes them together. So then it takes the value of first name and pops it in there, and then adds the literal space, which is a character, and then adds the value of last name, semicolon. So that's a print ln, so it'll jump to a new line. Then it'll print the literal string, welcome to Java. And then the kboard.close just tells the system that we're done reading from the scanner, which helps ensure that other programs can access that information properly. All right, so that's what's going on here. This line is super important in later chapters, and we're going to go much deeper into object creation and object-oriented programming. But just know that there is a class called scanner, and we are creating our own instance of that class called kboard that we can then access and manipulate. All right, now we didn't have to call it kboard. When I code, I typically call it kb. And as long as I change it everywhere that I access it, everything should function properly. Oh, I missed one. There we go. And then I run it. Now I don't have to enter my name. It's worth noting. I could enter a bunch of numbers, and I could enter name and numbers and a semicolon, and it will still recognize those as literal strings. All right, and that'll still function properly. Cool. So that's our greetings too. Let's jump over to the GUI stuff. So this is the Hello GUI. This is the beginning of 2.6. So it's a demo. All right, so let's just run it and see what happens. Oh, look at that. We got a little panel, a little frame in that panel that we've colored blue, little text box. There's a lot going on here. I do not expect you to know this code, okay? This is all about learning to read code and understand bits and pieces of what that code is doing versus writing that code from scratch yourself. So we import the Java AWT color library. This gives us access to color values using names instead of having to hard code color values, which is lovely. My class is called Hello GUI. My file name is Hello GUI, capital H and G. And it extends something called JFrame. This is one of the graphics modules from Swing, Java Swing. So it's going to allow us to access all of the things to manipulate a frame. Again, we set the title bar using this Super GUI demo. We set a content pane. We set a background color on that container. We set a layout. We add a JLabel, Hello GUI. If we run this again, we'll see that's this thing right here. Okay, so we created a new window. We set the bounds of that window. Remember, bounds start in the top left-hand corner. Okay, and then they grow. X grows out to the right, and Y grows as you move down. Okay, and then we set the default close operation, which just means that it waits for you to click the X to close the window. Set the visibility. All right, so this is where the color is getting changed. So you could change that color, say to red. Notice I use capitals, okay, because these are finals. These are constant values. So they're not variables as we typically know them. Okay, they remain unchanged. So we can just access them with their full capital value. Okay, so we can play around with that a little bit. We could go white if we wanted to. Okay, and we could change what's in here. Hello, man. Sup. And run it, and we'll see our new JLabel. So this is just giving a little bit of understanding as to how we can use a container, set the background, set a layout. I'll let you look up this flow layout here a little bit if you want. And then we added a new JLabel. We could probably do that again and add a second JLabel. Do that. And run it. And have a look what happens there. See, we added another one underneath it. Cool. So you start to get the idea. Some basics in there. Pop over to Hello Graphics and let's run this. Here's our Hello Graphics. We got a little red border. We got the blue thing. We're in a frame. Cool. So we got something new here. This paint components. Same idea here. Ooh, we're importing the graphics library now from Java AWT. Awesome. So start with our main. So in our main, we set up our window with a title. We set up the size of our window and our exit on close. We create a new panel this time instead of a component called panel. Set its background color. Let's change that to red. Now we get a container inside of our window and we add a panel to it. Cool. Now adding a panel to it is a little bit different because panel is a graphics panel and it's going to use this thing called paint component. So anytime it wants to refresh what's showing in the panel, it's going to use this paint component method. And this allows you to have more complex graphics in there versus just labels and things like that. So we call the paint component method of the parent class, which prints the background. Then we set the color to red and we draw a rectangle. Notice corner is at X and Y, width and height. And then we set the color again and then we draw the text. Okay, So I'm going to change this to black, and I'm going to change this to white. So we should have a red background with a black rectangle and white text. Red background, black rectangle, white text. So similar ideas, we're extending the J panel instead of the J frame this time because we want to access those graphics abilities that panel gives us versus just a frame. Okay, and so you can see the structure of this code. You don't need to understand it all. You just need to have that basic idea. So this is a paint component using a graphics object they're calling G. This won't make any sense to you at all until we do deeper class understanding, but it's calling the parent class's constructor and then using the parent object's paint component method with the graphics item or graphics object from this class. We'll get into that in more detail. Awesome. Let's pop over to Banner. Let's run that. So in its raw form, Banner is a blue background or a cyan background, red text scrolling across the screen. Neat. So what do we have? Well, extends this and implements an action listener. This is going to allow it to listen to timer events that are getting fired within our code. Imports graphics. Let's pop down to the main. Set up our window. Set up the size. Set up our panel. Set its background color. Create a container. Add the panel. Okay, set up our close conditions and our visibility. Now we're doing panel.x position equals panel.getWidth, y position, get height divided by 2. So in other words, it's starting at the furthest point to the right, so the full width of the panel, and halfway down the panel would be the initial x and y position for the panel. Okay, create a timer object. A new timer object called clock is a new timer object, 30 milliseconds, and it's the panel that's going to process or listen for this timer. All right, and then we start the clock. So every 30 milliseconds, the timer is going to fire an action that the panel is going to listen to. And it does that using this action performed method. So when the event occurs, in this case, it's a timer blast every 30 milliseconds, it's going to subtract 1 from the x position. So this code here is the same as x position equals x position minus 1. Okay, it says take the current value and subtract 1 from it and restore it in the same variable name. So that's what x position minus minus does. If it's less than negative 100, then pop it all the way back over to the other side. So it moves across the screen. When it gets to the very end, the if statement pops it back over to the other side. And then call the repaint method. So you've set the values. Now call repaint, which brings us to paint component. Calls the constructor thing to paint the background, sets the color to red, and then draws your string using the x plus y plus variables. Okay, remember we declared those at the very beginning of the file, and then we initialized them inside of our main method, and then we modified them inside of our action performed, and then we're using them to draw the string inside of our paint component. There's a lot going on. Slow it down, walk through it, see if you can make sense of it. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. If you're here and you still haven't gone and tried this code and tried going through this yourself in 2.4 and 2.6, you're doing this all wrong. Okay, if you aren't getting yourself into the code and trying to understand it and you're just expecting me to explain it all, you might understand some of it, but you're not really going to get it. And when the time comes for you to start with a blank file and write code, you have no idea what to do. So make sure that you're starting off by going through and investigating the problems yourself, beat your head against that wall a little bit, and then jump in and get the explanation and see where to go from there. All right, so this is kind of getting you started with those basics idea of the graphics. You're going to get in and write a little bit of code here at the end of chapter 2 with some of the questions that I put out there, and we'll talk a little bit more about those after. It's also worth noting that you can always email me code. So if you finish some of the harder questions in this chapter, or you finish the game of NIM, and you want to email me some of that code so I can have a look at it, that would be wonderful. You're going to be doing a chapter 1-2 test. I'll post on Classroom the PowerPoints or the PDFs from the textbook that just kind of go through the topics in chapter 1 and 2. But you all have access to the textbook. Your tests will be 20 multiple choice questions and then a combination of free response. You'll be filling the multiple choice on a bubble sheet. You can use a scientific calculator, but it's of no real benefit to you. You will not have a calculator for the actual AP exam at the end of the course. So I will throw out more information about that onto the Google Classroom. Please make sure when you're working through the asynchronous lessons that you complete the work that I embed inside of your pair decks, because I will be grading that work to make sure that it's been completed. Other than that, email me when you have your questions. Thanks so much, and best of luck with your work. Have a good day.